What comes to mind when you think of the word testimony? Well, it's exactly how I approached writing this poem. Starting on the left-hand side of the page, which is what I've deemed the collection side of my notebook. It's just listing down ideas, things that were essential to me. I understood that testimony comes from the root of witness, right? And so I related that back to the idea of a judge. The fact that in the Christian faith, there is this great cloud of witnesses watching, or to testify or testimony are all central themes. And so, in trying to determine a conceit for this poem, I decided to stick with the idea of a courtroom or a judge. And as is so prevalent an idea, looking back over one's life at the end of it. And since this poem is chronological, I thought it would be interesting to have this placed at the very end of it, as if working as a catalog of sorts of all of these other poems, and maybe not summarizing, but epitomizing all these other notions, motifs, ideas that were central to those other poems. Now, this is an instance in which drafting really became associated with the form. You'll notice in the bottom right-hand side of the page that I've listed islands there, because at first these are just ideas bouncing around, but I thought it would relate to the more abstract, ethereal presence of this courtroom at the end of the hallway. If they were kind of islands where things were sort of spaced out, as if given time to breathe one from another. And so I looked for ways to highlight essential moments, key traits, and decided that this drafting process would eventually become the form of the poem itself. I also thought it was an interesting idea that the judge in this would not be necessarily sentencing, condemning, but rather proceeding over a testimony. Like a person who is the witness is asked to testify to these things, to all these experiences, all these moments that make up or comprise the life, which leads to this poem being essentially a bunch of islands of personal revelations. The problem is that I had to keep them general enough to convey their emotional core while still retaining validity and importance to the rest of the work. So working within that conceit, I discussed things like moments of baptism or small statements of faith or moments of truth that have become vital to me, like the dog was impossible to keep, which later I'll revise, or the fact that I used to pray for tragedy. So the I in this poem is going to be a pretty close alter ego of my own. I had to be very selective in the choosing of these moments, and so you'll notice that even though the video is sped up, there's long pauses between writing each of these. And so coming up with these small moments and spacing them out was essentially trying to create a conversation around these moments. Now, the next stage of the drafting process was to put this on the screen, to see how this could be presented in a Word document. So as I started to transcribe a lot of these small moments or ideas, a narrative started to form. I decided to base these chronologically as well, and found that they worked, which is a beautiful thing to discover. The next part was simply trying to figure out how to space them. Now, I knew the beginning of this poem, where the judge asked the question, "Are you a witness of these things?" And I knew the ending, which was a powerful "I am" statement. And so, all that being said, this is testimony. In the courtroom at the end of the hallway, the judge asks, "Are you a witness of these things?" I used to pray for tragedy. There is magic, baking in the heat, rinsing in ice water. I held my breath when I went under. I was afraid of love. Sometimes I'm still holding my breath. I could have kept the dog if I tried. Questions, questions. There is still so much I do not understand. Sin and guilt, not guilt, conviction. I ate the cupcake. I did. All things are political. Nothing is political. All poetry is personal. I'm afraid of being a man. Jesus was the Son of God. He died and lived. I cannot explain an arc, but I have chosen love. I testify I am